Michael Popok, Legal AF. You can learn a lot about a person and their bankruptcy filings, including their assets and liabilities and things they don't list that they probably should have and that a bankruptcy trustee should take a hard look at. That's what I have taken away from reading Rudy Giuliani's financial statements required by the bankruptcy code to be filed. I have them all. I digested them, and I'm going to tell you the shocking things that are listed and buried within there. First of all, how did we get here? Well, you know how we got here. Rudy Giuliani has been a henchman for Donald Trump for a long time. He's gotten effectively disbarred in 2 different jurisdictions, and he is now the judgment debtor for $148 million judgment verdict for defamation that was obtained by Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss in the D.C. trial court level from a jury for them being mercilessly and relentlessly doxxed and defamed by Rudy Giuliani, including following the lead of his mentor, Donald Trump, during the trial itself and outside the trial on the steps of the courthouse. So the jury punished Giuliani the way that juries know how to do with a $148 million judgment. But that's not the only major lawsuit. There are lawsuits listed as potential liability and exposure for Rudy Giuliani on his form that could dwarf the Ruby Freeman Shay Moss one. Let me give you an example of what he has listed on his schedule of what he is looking at in terms of lawsuits. Let me just give you the list here. First of all, he's got the Dominion lawsuit because Dominion voting machines is going after him at present. Smartmatic, the other voting systems company, voting software company that was defamed by Rudy Giuliani as part of the Sidney Powell conspiracy theory that Smartmatic and Dominion, working with Venezuela, was trying to flip votes electronically that were cast for Trump into votes for Joe Biden. All that untrue. Dominion settled their case with Fox for almost $790 million last year, but they still got a suit against Rudy Giuliani, which of course he had to list on his schedule of potential exposure. So you've got those 2 major lawsuits. He's also got a lawsuit for a couple of $1 million that was brought by a former friend of his, Bob Costello, who represented him in his various bar and legal proceedings, but he got stiffed by Rudy Giuliani up to $2 million in fees. So on the list of things, you've got Davidoff, Hutcher, and Citron, the law firm that he stiffed, being listed as a pending lawsuit in the state Supreme Court here in New York. Noelle Dunphy, who used to be his personal assistant, is also suing him in a Supreme Court for her claim that he reduced her to a sexual slave and retaliated against her and discrimination and harassment related to that. So you've got that. You've got Hunter Biden suing Rudy Giuliani for defamation as well. Although Rudy couldn't figure out, even though he's a former lawyer, he couldn't figure out what courtroom, what courthouse some of these lawsuits are currently pending. He got the first 3 right, New York State Supreme, but when it got to Hunter Biden versus Rudy Giuliani, he couldn't tell the bankruptcy court what courthouse that's in, but that's a defamation suit, and there's tens of millions, if not more, at stake there. Ruby Freeman and Moss, that says pending. It's really not pending any longer. It's maybe going to be on appeal one day, but that's on there. And then the Smartmatic USA versus Rudy Giuliani. Any one of these other ones, Dunphy, Biden, Smartmatic, they could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars against Rudy Giuliani too. And then I guess for a little bit of fun, he listed some bogus potential assets of his estate, including a potential defamation case of all things against President Joe Biden. Good luck with that. I don't think that's ever going to happen, nor is he ever going to recover there. And then also listed a potential claim against Donald Trump for not having paid him for his attorney's fees. That one I can believe, although I don't think he'll ever recover that, especially with the new reporting that Donald Trump has spent over $73 million in the last about a year in 2023 on his legal expenses. Not one of them apparently paid for Rudy Giuliani, although he did host a fundraiser for Rudy, the proceeds of which are missing from the bankruptcy filing. But that's not all that's missing. He's a podcaster, or claims to be, yet, of course, he has a typo. I love typos. In the name of his own company, he has Giuliani Communications I think he's meant communications. Can't get the name of his own company right. He listed as a podcast, but under revenue generated from the podcast, and here comes the next misstatement or lie on the filing. He says he's got no income from it. I don't know. I've watched clips from his podcast. Seems to have some sort of subscriber service, asking people to pay him money. I think he's got some advertisers on there. He's always got his hand out. Where's that money? That needs to be accurately reflected on a bankruptcy filing, and it is not. He lists over $46,000 in revenue, but doesn't list any income from his podcast. And then he lists $43,000 in expenses, including $13,500 a month that he owes by court order to his former mother-in-law for a loan that she gave him, and another $5,000 for alimony. He lists very little in the way of bank account money. For a guy that was America's mayor and a successful, allegedly successful law practice that Donald Trump hired, he has $14,000 in checking, $351 in savings, that's dollars, and $30 in cash at the time of the filing of the paperwork. Where's the rest of your money, Rudy? And then he lists about $60,000 in personal effects, some rings, some watches, and the clothes on his back, effectively. And so he's showing a net income available to pay a judgment at only $2,300 a month. Well, it's going to be a lot of months of paying off Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss at that level, but leave it to the bankruptcy trustee, who I think will get to the bottom of many, many of these numbers. He's got, for instance, he says he's getting additional money, additional payments that are being made to him. He says he got the $68,000 that he's had to pay lawyers to file the bankruptcy. He says he got that from a defense fund, some sort of PAC. This is back to the fundraising that he does on his podcast. I wonder if he's properly declared that with the Internal Revenue Service. He says he got $30,000 that was paid by the Giuliani defense. I guess that's a fund, maybe a GoFundMe page, and $40,000 paid by the Giuliani Freedom Fund Legal Defense TR Fund. Okay, so he's grifting, collecting money from people and using it to file for his bankruptcy in total payments, but doesn't list that as income. I think that's going to be a problem for the Internal Revenue Service at the appropriate time. And so many of these things just sort of don't make sense. The no money from the podcast revenue, all of his money coming from, according to him, coming from his retirement funds, which are very difficult for a judgment creditor like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss to get their hands on, which is why I think he's saying that. He says he's got over $10 million in assets, which includes an apartment in New York, a condo in Florida, which seem to have very little in the way of mortgages on them. I looked to see a list of liens. I really didn't see a tremendous list of liens or mortgages that they're responsible. He says he's got $1.1 million in an IRA, another $100,000 in a retirement account, and $163,000 in a 401k. Of course, the 401k can be immediately liquidated and used to pay the judgment. If I'm the lawyers for Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, I take this filing and whatever they learn from the interview of the debtor that has to happen under oath in the case as well, and go run around to Fidelity and say, give me the 401k, and try to grab some of these things. And there's some protections against some of these things. It might require litigation or the trustee to order the liquidation of these amounts. I think there's the immediate liquidation of the house in Florida, of the apartment in New York, and use that $6 or $8 million there, probably more, given the rising real estate market, and pay that to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. They are the first in line. I mentioned the other lawsuits, Hunter Biden's, Smartmatic, Dominion, Noel Dunphy, but they're, in terms of priority, which is what we call it in bankruptcy and in creditors' rights, they are behind the line of the first judgment creditor who has a security interest that's above, if you will, is better than an unsecured interest, which is these cases that have not yet gone to judgment. Judgments are a higher quality of obligation, a debt obligation that's recognized under the creditor's rights and bankruptcy code than lawsuits. When they get their judgments, you got to come in behind. So, I think they're first in line to get paid from anything here. And, this particular bankruptcy, And I've given you some sort of the highlights that don't make any sense and will have to continue to be investigated by the trustee here that's involved. If he's going for a liquidation of all of his assets, then if that's the appropriate bankruptcy code to use, which is Chapter 7, then they'll marshal all the assets, they'll liquidate them, and they'll start paying creditors in order of priority, including at the front of the line, towards the front of the line, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. If he's going for a Chapter 11 reorganization, they'll sort of do the same thing, but they'll be offering people cents on the dollar, pennies on the dollar for their debt. But my takeaway on this particular hot take is Rudy Giuliani is not being truthful with the bankruptcy trustee or the bankruptcy judge. He's left off key information that's obvious in the public record. He's lowballed the numbers on his assets. He's tried to put all of his money, as much as possible, in very difficult to obtain in foreclosure and bankruptcy retirement funds and Social Security funds, because they can be forfeited, but it's more difficult. He's underreported the amount of earnings that he's made from his podcast. And he's put on some liabilities on there, some assets on there that, of course, he has no hope of ever recovering, which is money from Donald Trump for attorney's fees and a future suit against Joe Biden for defamation, which likely wouldn't even get past an application of the immunity defense. And then, of course, he reveals that he's made at least, but I don't think this is all of it, $70,000 in various funds, separating supporters of his from their money to pay for his bankruptcy filing and all. So we'll continue to follow. The good news is that the Justice and Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss pushed Rudy Giuliani into bankruptcy, but now he's in the clutches of a very competent bankruptcy judge and trustee who'll have to get to the bottom of everything here under oath, and then leave it to the judgment creditors and their lawyers to go after every ounce of money, every shekel that's listed here, and discover more that's being hidden. I am sure that Rudy Giuliani has not listed every one of his assets appropriately. I can tell from a cursory glance of what he's filed. So we'll continue to follow everything related to the march to justice by victims of MAGA here, one place, MeidasTouch Network, 2 million strong, and on the Legal AF podcast on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern time. The title is Exactly What You Think, full length, an hour or so, curated at the intersection of law, politics, and justice podcast, and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. If you like what we're doing here, you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. It helps keep me on the air and keeps the network kind of moving and shaking. And until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.